Welcome. In this video on totalitarianism, we will cover the Nazis. Last time we talked about Hitler's rise to power and where he came from, the things he spoke about and what made him popular in Germany in the 1920s. However, Hitler was imprisoned after a failed coup or putsch where he and the Nazis tried to seize power in Germany. During that time in prison, for which he only was sentenced to 5 years, though he only served 9 months, he wrote his autobiography or memoir, Mein Kampf. We then left off with a discussion of parliamentary versus winner-take-all elections. Germany, the democratic government called the Weimar Republic, used a parliamentary-style election. We here in the United States have winner-take-all elections. Both are democratic, but they take a different approach to elections. Let's explore the differences. In a winner-take-all system, you have generally smaller districts that have one seat. The person who earns the plurality, the highest number of votes, wins that one seat. In a parliamentary system, you have larger districts with, say, 5, 10, or more seats. In that large district, you assign the several seats proportionally. So if your party gets roughly 10% of the vote, you get 10% of the seats. So rather than voting for individual candidates, you vote for a slate of candidates. Our winner-take-all system favors, sort of in a backhanded way, a two-party system. And that you have a great number of people who end up voting not for a party they identify totally with, but with, they say, I like some of the things about this party, and I consider it the lesser of two evils, that I like some of these things, but I dislike more things about that other party, so even though there are things I disagree with, I feel forced to vote for one of the two major parties. Versus in a parliamentary system, you have a lot more freedom to vote for a party that matches your exact views, because they may only need to get 5, 10, or 15% of the vote in order for you to have a representative who exactly represents your political views. That leads to the difference that in a winner-take-all system, in a two-party system, you have to be very popular. You really have to run in some way to the middle, in the way that you need a plurality or majority in order to win any seats. Versus in a parliamentary system, you only need a minority of support, a relatively small minority compared to our American system. What does that mean? It means our system is less democratic. It's harder to get someone that directly represents your views elected. But it is more stable. It pushes people to the middle. It pushes people into two relatively stable parties. A parliamentary system is more democratic. You really can have representatives that exactly match your voice. The downside is it can be quite a bit less stable as you have so many divergent views represented. What is a coalition government? A coalition government is when no party gets a majority in the elected assembly. Because a parliamentary system permits and in a way encourages third, fourth, fifth parties, it can be relatively easy for no party to get a majority. That means 2 or more parties form an alliance called a coalition in order to actually get a prime minister and form a government. And so this is the Weimar Republic of Germany when Hitler becomes the chancellor. You have government controlled by a temporary alliance, and this was needed in order to form a majority party. So what happened was there was a split of votes among 3 major parties. The communists also had a fraction of the vote, but they were not large enough to make a majority. And the more conservative party allies with the Nazis, hoping they could make Hitler, I believe the title was vice chancellor or something to that effect, but the Nazis wouldn't accept it. They would only form a government with someone else if they would let Hitler become the chancellor. And they reluctantly gave in, hoping or thinking they would be able to control Hitler, but it would not stay that way for long. So he is an elected representative. There are rules, there are laws, there's technically a president, President Hindenburg, as well, that in a way is over Hitler. And so how is it that you have Hitler elected into a position of considerable but not total power? How does he become a totalitarian? Well, remember, in the 1920s, the party was almost killed off. The economic recovery of the late 20s pushed past the hyperinflation crisis. Hitler himself was in jail. However, the Great Depression strikes starting in 1929, and by 1932 elections, the Nazis had gained a third of all the seats in the Reichstag, which was the elected assembly, the parliament, the Congress of Weimar Germany, was called the Reichstag. And the Nazis had a third of the seats. And one of the things we know is the more desperate you are, when you have nothing else to lose, when the economy is that bad, and someone says, they sound a little crazy, but say, listen to me and I'll fix these problems. We need something really different. We need a revolution type of thing. When you're desperate, you know, someone who's a more outside the mainstream or extreme or crazy seems more appealing. There was a common saying around Europe, particularly in more conservative circles, better Hitler than Leon Blum. Leon Blum was a French leader who was Jewish and a socialist, and formed a coalition government in France called the Popular Front, which they formed a coalition of several smaller parties and began introducing socialism in limited ways into France. And so Hitler, who, you know, even the Nazis had socialism in their name, but they believed that he was less of a threat than socialists like Leon Blum, which is a common saying. And so many people were not sold on all of Hitler's other ideology. There were those who felt they didn't have much choice, and that given the choices, Hitler was better than some others. Another one of Hitler's big allies early on was a man named Ernst Röhm. And Ernst Röhm was the leader of the Brown Shirts, also called the SA, which is an abbreviation of a German word for this brown-shirted thugs. These are a group of paramilitary goons. Hitler is imitating Mussolini, who came a decade before. Mussolini had his black shirts, and so Hitler created the brown shirts. These are guys who maybe have a day job. They're not the real police. They're not the real army. It's a mix between scouting and the Klan, you know. They wear these uniforms and claim to be doing public service, but yet they're kind of thuggish terrorists by night, and they're, you know, they don't really have any legal status, but the police doesn't do anything because many times what you can prove they've done maybe wasn't very illegal, and if you do anything to stop them, it could cause a riot or a strike, you know, might break out, and many people are sympathetic to the Nazis and their brown shirt thugs. And so that's one of the ways they use to intimidate their opponents, through that it's not directly the government doing it, it's these pro-Nazi brown shirts are intimidating people, committing violence, threats of violence, acts of violence, and they're going unpunished because the Nazis also have power in the government, in the real police, that basically doesn't crack down on the brown shirts. And then they get even bolder and stronger when the police don't do anything about them. A critical point was the Reichstag fire in 1932. That would be like their parliament building, their Capitol building, the Congress building. A terrible fire breaks out in this Reichstag building, and the Nazis use this as evidence that there's a communist plot about to try to seize power. It could have been an accident. It could have been the Nazis planted it. It could have been the communists. No one really knows. But Hitler has the Reichstag pass a temporary emergency enabling act in 1933. The president, Hindenburg, actually died, not in the fire, but previously, and they had not replaced him yet. And with this enabling act, it gave Hitler as chancellor emergency powers, and once he had them, he used those emergency dictator-like powers to never give up those powers. Shortly thereafter, he actually enacted what was called the Night of the Long Knives, which was a purge of the Nazi Party, including Ernst Röhm and some of the other people who helped him get to power. Hitler purges, meaning kills them or has them imprisoned, at people who had previously helped him, but people who also thought they were kind of co-leader or someone who was just as important as Hitler. And he has a purge of his own party once they've got all this power, and cleans house. kills off many of those people. So once they're in power, what does Nazism look like? The word Nazi comes from a anglicization of the NSDAP, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nationaliste Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei in German. And so what do they stand for? They stand for nationalism, and an extreme form of nationalism known as Aryanism, or Germans as the master race. We will see this in an extreme form during the war in the Holocaust, which we will study next unit. A systematic persecution of the Jews, and in its most extreme form late in the war as the final solution. We will talk about that. They are uber-nationalist, as they call themselves the Third Reich. Remember, the Holy Roman Empire was the first, the Kaiser's Germany was the Second Reich, and this, Hitler's Germany, destroys the Weimar Republic and proclaims a Third Empire, or Third Reich. What is their foreign policy? The Nazis see democracy as a failed experiment. They seek Lebensraum, or living space, breathing room. The Germans want more land for the vibrant master people, and so adding land to Germany is a big part of their foreign policy. And enemy number one is the Treaty of Versailles. They want irredenta. There's land where German speakers live that are in other states, and they want it to be part of the German nation state. They want to undo the war guilt clause. They believe Germany unfairly got all of the war guilt. They want to rearm Germany. Germany, coming from Prussia, had the proudest military tradition of any country in the world, maybe ever, or at least in the top competition for that, and yet they were reduced to having almost no army. This is very shameful for something that once they were very proud of. And so rearmament of the German military was, even without war, the military just had such a pride of place in Germany that even without war, there were many who just wanted rearmament. They wanted Germany to have a strong military because that was so German to do, so Prussian to do. And they, of course, wanted to end reparations. What about socialism? They promote public works, heavy military spending, and that the individual doesn't matter, the state matters. But it's not full-blown communism because you have state cooperation control and not elimination of capitalism or the bourgeoisie. So it is not as extreme as Stalin's communism, but it's closer to, it's not quite Fabian democratic socialism, but again, it's this kind of halfway sort of socialist, sort of communist mentality. But it is full-blown totalitarianism. He creates the Gestapo, or the secret police. They don't investigate crimes, they investigate regular crimes. They investigate political crimes, or crimes against the Nazi ideology. It takes over the culture. You have things like, there's a joke I would tell, but you have to see it, about a Nazi bowling club. You have the Hitler Youth. You don't have scouting, you have the Hitler Youth. And there grows up this cult of the leader, Hitler, der Führer. Okay, der Führer, German for the leader, and this idea that Hitler is this larger-than-life, can do no wrong figure, and we follow him blindly wherever he goes, whatever he says, really grows up in this totalitarian, the government controls everything. Grows up. And finally, censorship and propaganda. They write the textbooks, they train the teachers. You have informants to the Gestapo, teachers against their students, parents and children against each other, the pupils against teachers. Anyone could rat anyone out, and there's no laws to protect you. The Gestapo, the secret police, can knock on anyone's door and you can be in deep trouble. You had book burning festivals and ceremonies where they would gather and burn books that were hostile to the Nazi regime. They would rewrite the texts. A famous slogan was strength through joy. Just be happier and we'll be strong together. Don't voice your concerns about things. And finally, there's a great quote about why didn't people do something. Martin Niemöller, quote, said, first they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't speak up. They came for the Jews, but I was Christian, so I didn't do anything. Then they came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't in a union, so I didn't speak up. Then they came for the Catholics, but I was a Lutheran, so I didn't speak up. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak up for me. Next time we'll talk about the totalitarian states and their aggression that leads us into the Second World War. Thanks for watching.